I just have a couple of items here listed on the agenda, and then got some time where we wanted to just talk about our main topic. Before I get into any of this stuff, does anybody have anything that they'd like to talk about on the agenda, or maybe add to a future meeting's agenda that they wanted to ask about now? All right, I'm hearing nothing. So the one item of old business is something we addressed in previous meetings, but want to make sure everybody out there is aware of it, is that the University of Utah School of Medicine, this is our resource for our lead training. They do have their 2017 course schedule available. If you have to take any of those courses this year, make sure you go to their website and get signed up. A lot of the stuff is in like this month and just the first quarter of the year, so make sure you're signed up if you need that. The next thing was, there were two items. The first one was that I wanted to make sure, especially for auditors, that you guys are aware of the Weatherization Assistant has a user's manual. Ian kind of reminded me of this again, and I realized that this is a resource that the auditor should really be aware of and have. So you can find it on the WAPTAC website, but you can also, I put a copy of it on our website as well. So just to show you where that's at, if you go to the iwtcutah.org and click on our resources page, I've just been putting all the stuff that's really auditor specific under attachment 7, and if you look down here, it's the NEAT MIA user's manual, and if you click on that, it's like a 700-page PDF. It's got a ton of stuff in it. Basically, the folks that wrote the audit tried to give a description of what you would need to know about every single page, everything you're doing in the audit. There's a lot of good info in there. I've found that chapter, I want to say it's chapter 9. Yeah, chapter 9 for the NEAT and chapter 10 for the MIA. It'll kind of walk you through each of the tabs on the audit and give you a lot more information about what you need to put into each of those fields when you're filling that out. So this could be a very valuable resource especially for auditors. So if you're not aware of it, you haven't looked at it, I would recommend that you check that out, download a copy of it, and keep it on your desktop. So the other thing I wanted to just address quickly was the fuel survey. Brad put out a program notice last week, I think, saying that the fuel survey was updated. And then yesterday, Nelson brought it to our attention that there were some conflicting effective dates within the fuel survey. And so Brad had to put out another email yesterday just to let everybody know that the intended effective date was February 1st. And really, on the fuel survey, each agency should be updating that. It's not the end of the world if you don't do it on February 1st, but really this week you should be updating that and making a change to your setup library change log. And once you've made those changes, then you'll move forward with your next audit using the new setup library instead of the old one. So if any auditors have any questions on how to do that, it's really not that complicated. It'll take you about 20 minutes, and you're welcome to call me. I will walk you through it and help you to make sure you do that right if you have any questions. But auditors, make sure that you're getting that done this week, because you really, now that that's effective, that information should really be what you're running all of your audits against. So does anybody have any question on any of these items?
No.
All right. Well, that's all I had for new and old business before we jump into just our main topic today, which is this question here. So I wanted to basically kind of walk you guys through a house that I went into where I feel like kind of it clicked for me when I walked in this house. It kind of, some of these concepts made a lot more sense when I saw this particular situation. So I wanted to share it with you guys. I know some of you probably, this concept is not new. You have a very solid understanding of it. But I also know there's some of you out there that are still struggling with this. So I wanted to share it with you and make it available. So we have it in the future and stuff. So the question is, how big is your CAZ? As I'm going through this, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, and I want you guys to participate as much as you can. And let's have a little bit of a discussion on this. So let me just get my stuff set up here so I can run a slideshow. Okay, so for the purpose of this discussion, we need to define what a CAZ is. Now, we could have some semantical arguments about this, but at the end of the day, the definition of a CAZ is really not all that important, other than when I talk about it here, you probably just need to know what I'm talking, at least what I mean when I say, your CAZ. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's say that this is the definition of a CAZ. So again, CAZ stands for Combustion Appliance Zone. And the definition would be the portion of a home from which the combustion appliance or appliances pull combustion air from. So it's going to be that zone that the combustion appliance or appliances are drawing all of their combustion air from. So again, if you have a different definition of that, as long as you understand these concepts, we'll probably be okay. But for today's discussion, that's the definition. Now, the other thing I want to talk about before we look at this example of a home is something else that was recently brought to my attention. Is there's a little confusion on the worst case draft form about what we're doing, and particularly on the short form. But I also wanted to look at this because this is something that most of you are very familiar with. So we're talking about how big is your CAZ, and we're talking about the definition of a CAZ being, the zone from which all the appliances draw combustion air. We're really talking about this portion of the short form. And basically on the short form, we're conducting two separate tests. We're conducting this test here. Test number 1 is first. And then once we've set up the house into this into its worst case depressurization, then we move on to test 2. But I realize that because I have put the minimum acceptable draft up here and to the left, that it kind of makes it feel like all this is one big process. So I want to, if you have concerns or questions about where, the delineation between those two, reach out to us. We can definitely provide more training on that. But just for the purpose of the discussion, I wanted to point that out, that again, when we're doing a worst case draft test, we're first thing we're doing is we're going to put the CAZ into its worst depressurization that we can possibly put it into. And then once we have it there, then we're going to conduct test number 2, which is where we go and we measure the vent pressure on the appliances. So when we're putting the CAZ in worst case depressurization, we're turning on anything that would cause the house to go to depressurize, or to the CAZ itself to depressurize. And it's not always very clear, and so in some cases we'll be most of the time you're turning exhaust fans on, but in some situations you're going to turn them off, because that would put the CAZ into its worst case, or it would depressurize the CAZ more. Same thing with the dryer, the air handler, the fireplace, And then the most difficult or the trickiest one is the doors that affect the CAZ. And then anything else in the home that might affect the pressure in the CAZ. So anyway, so when we're talking about how big is your CAZ and we're talking about depressurizing it, we're really talking about this first part of the test. So with that in mind, I wanted to have you guys look at this house that I went into. This was up in the Cache Valley. It's just your standard, typical Boise Cascade. It's got a crawl space underneath it. So it's just a rambler with a flat ceiling and fairly normal attic and things like that. And inside this house, it had a small mechanical closet. Inside the mechanical closet, there was a furnace, and I don't remember, when I got there, the guys, I think they had swapped it out, so it had a 95% furnace. For the case of this discussion, we'll say that this house had a 95% efficient furnace, so it was a direct vent furnace, and it had an atmospheric water heater in it. Now, the other important thing to know about this house is that the door on the CAZ was vented, and they're drawing their combustion air from inside the house. So my first question to you guys is, how big is the CAZ on this house? And don't everybody speak up at once. But I do need some feedback and participation on this one. So if you're out there, unmute yourself and let's talk about this. How big's the CAZ on this house?
It's the house with the exception of the bedrooms and bathroom.
Okay, so Tony says it's the house with the exception of the bedroom and the bathroom. You want to elaborate on that?
All the doors open, it's the whole house.
Well, it would be, but you're technically not supposed to pull combustion air from bedrooms and bathrooms. You're right, though. With the doors open, it is the whole house.
That's a good point. Anybody else want to weigh in on it? What's the question? There's no ceiling, so it's the whole world?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole.
Okay, so what happens when and it's kind of hard to see, but what happens when I close this little door here? Does anything change?
Nothing. You got grills on the door.
Yeah.
It will pull harder, though.
Yeah, it's going to change the pressure a little bit, but our CAZ, the zone from which we're drawing air is still, it's going to be larger. So basically it's not just limited to this little closet, right? It's connected to, and as someone mentioned, right now with all of the doors open, we could make the argument that it could be the whole house. I actually like Tony's argument better, which that we should not be pulling combustion air from bedrooms. And, so that's something to bear in mind as well. But the main point is, as we go through this, we're going to think about how to get that CAZ into its worst case, or, to depressurize it the most, right?
It's just, when you figure your volume, you discount the bedrooms and the bathrooms, and technically, when you calculate your volume, it should be the area that you're using, so that should be your CAZ.
That's perfect. And so when you're saying, when we're looking at, we need to have enough combustion air for this appliance, and so when you calculate the volume of the space that it could draw its combustion air from, this space minus all the bedrooms and bathrooms has to be large enough to allow for that. Is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so
We don't have enough pressure to pull from that far away. We just open the kitchen.
I heard someone saying something about pulling some pressure from that far away, but I didn't hear you clearly. Was that? What was that comment? Sorry.
Go ahead.
All right. We'll move on. I didn't really hear the comment very clearly. If you're having any audio issues, you can also use the chat box as well, but you may have to call pay attention to it.
I didn't catch it too well either, Matt, but it sounded like you wouldn't be pulling it from that far away. Although that's not true, because if you have a return in a bedroom, you're pulling air that way. So, you know,
Yeah,
you
that's
just got to look where the returns are. And if there's just supplies in there, you're pressurizing. So,
and
you know,
that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Absolutely, like in the real world, you're going to, you have all these these other things going on, and so you can say, well, is it really going to pull air from that far? But then you have other forces going on, as Tony mentioned, and so I've got this example. I'm going to throw some numbers up here, and I've totally exaggerated the numbers, but just so we can have some nice big round numbers to use, I wanted to kind of talk about what happens. So if we were going to put our CAZ into its most negative state, or depressurize the CAZ as much as possible, what would we do to this house?
where are your returns? Is that your return within 10 feet of the door? That's not supposed to be there?
Perfect. So, and yes, and yes. So in this house, all these little black boxes, these are all supplies. And this vent right here is the return in this house. So, and Tony's already pointed out that it's not far enough away from all of this, but in this particular situation, I modified it slightly to show it on the floor instead of the wall, but that's pretty much what they walked into in the house. So as an auditor, if you're walking into this house for the first time and this is the condition you find the house in, you don't get to modify stuff yet. You first have to do your worst case draft test, right? Because you got to make sure that when you leave tonight that the homeowners are safe. Just unfortunately, that's the burden we carry because of the knowledge we have. So you're going to test in. Also, it allows us to document that this was the state we found the house in. But so if we found the house in this situation, what are we going to do to depressurize the CAZ?
You'll turn your fan on, your air handler, that's probably going to have your most effect.
Yeah.
And close the bedroom doors.
Okay. So let's...
If you shut the door, it may increase or decrease. It just depends. It depends on if there's a supply off of the furnace in that little room.
In which little room?
In the water heater room.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, it would depend on if there was a supply in there, or what else could cause issues in there.
If you got holes in your return.
Yeah. Okay, so let's, I think my next slide shows it. So just for the sake of our discussion here, let's say that this furnace has turbo on it, and it's putting out gobs of pressure, and it was also designed really, really well. And we have exactly 20 pascals of pressure coming out of each vent. Now in the real world, you're going to get much less than that, but just for our argument, we'll say each one of these supplies is putting out 20 pascals of pressure, and our return is pulling 100 pascals of pressure. So with all the doors open, is this house going to be under positive pressure or negative pressure? Just by turning on the air handler.
It could depend, but it still might be negative, even though it seems like it'd be more positive.
Yes, and that's the most important thing, is that it could always depend. Like, don't ever walk into a house and think, well, I can see clearly exactly what this is going to do. You'll find, as you think about this concept and look at it, I'll bet half the time, more than half the time, your guess will be right, but be careful not to just make assumptions. So,
and especially the fact that you don't have a ceiling, it's probably going to be under negative pressure.
Absolutely. Okay, so if we, right now, if you look at it, we have 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, and 140. So we have 140 pascals of positive pressure and 100 pascals of negative pressure. So this house is probably, if it had a ceiling, under positive pressure, just with the air handler on and all the doors open. But so let's go ahead and close the doors. And as was mentioned, by closing the doors, this really gets us down to what our CAZ should be, right? And so now, how's our pressure doing in the CAZ? Are we under positive pressure or negative pressure?
You know, Matt, I mean, I understand what you're trying to do, but it's probably, even though you shut the doors, it's still not going to cut off all that pressure. Are the doors undercut? How much are the doors undercut?
You're exactly right. In the real world, this is not exactly what's going to happen because the doors are undercut. But for the sake of the example, let's say that each of these doors were perfectly airtight. And again, because we think this is our CAZ, but in reality, there's probably a little hole over here, and then we're drawing a little bit of air out of that room. We may be pushing a little bit of air into this room. But for the sake of the example, again, if we were perfectly isolated here, and we had this crazy amount of pressure coming out of each vent, by closing those doors, we just cut out 20, 40, 60, 80 pascals of pressure from our CAZ, right? And so our CAZ, if the doors were open and the zone from which we were actually drawing all of our combustion air, we were at a positive 40 because we had 140 positive and 100 negative, so we were at a positive 40. By closing those doors, we just took out all of that pressure, and now we are at a negative 40, right? So by closing those doors and having this return air inside our CAZ, in a lot of situations, it will cause your CAZ to go negative. In some cases, it'll cause your CAZ to go very negative. So let me ask you this, whether this return air was here or whether it was over here, what's the difference between having a return air in your CAZ and having just some leakage on the return air duct inside your CAZ? Is there a difference?
There technically shouldn't be, but that's not the real world. At further away, you're still going to pull less.
Correct. Absolutely correct. All I wanted to really point out is there's a lot of scenarios or a lot of situations where you're going to get into a home and the return air is going to end up inside the CAZ. And it could cause your CAZ pressure to be very, very negative. And it's pretty much the same thing. It's doing the exact same thing as if you had duct leakage inside your CAZ. The only problem is that the duct leakage inside your CAZ, you can probably go in and patch that up and seal it up. Whereas you get into a home like this and you might be able to move or redesign the duct for them, but you're probably going to move it. You want to keep your return air in one of these common areas, so it's still going to end up inside your CAZ, right? Even if you were to move it.
Or you could take the door off and bring an outside air into that room and just seal the room off.
And that's definitely one of the solutions that you can go for. So, in fact, let's see. Oh, so the other thing I want to talk about, so now, we're doing our worst case draft test, right? And we turned on the air handler and we talked about the effect that the air handler can have on it. But in this house, it also had the dryer in this little nook, there was no door here, so it was also essentially right inside the CAZ. And again, a dryer is not going to have 50 pascal of pressure, but just to exaggerate things, when you turn that dryer on, what effect does that have on the CAZ?
It should make it more negative.
Yeah, so in our perfect world scenario here, it's going to make it more negative, right? And if everything else was airtight, we should see that drop that another 50 pascals total. So now our CAZ is getting pretty negative, right? What else could affect the pressure of our CAZ in our picture here?
Kitchen fan?
Is there a kitchen fan?
And that's, in this scenario, there's no fans in the house. So there's no bath fan, no kitchen fan. So I would say we probably covered it. So if we were doing our worst case test, we would turn on the dryer, we would close all of these doors, and then we would measure the pressure near this appliance, right? And we'd see just how negative that CAZ was. And obviously we'd be measuring the pressure all along, and we'd be closing all of these doors and taking measurements at every step of the way, right? So that we could ensure that we were actually putting the CAZ into its most negative pressure. But what's interesting... Go ahead.
Another key point is how connected those bedrooms are to the outdoors. Because once you isolate those supplies in the bedroom from the return, you're now going to blow all that supply air. So let's just take, for example, that the bedroom on the left is very connected to the outdoors through some kind of big hole in the wall.
With an air conditioner.
All of the supply air going into that room now goes directly to the outdoors, and you now have a giant exhaust fan in there. So a great example of that is maybe a window-mounted swamp cooler in that bedroom that's not covered with plastic or some kind of cover. Once you close that bedroom door, all of that supply air going in there, whatever it is, however many pascals or CFM, now has a direct path to the outdoors, which is essentially the same exact thing as an exhaust fan. That supply air can't get back to the return, so it's going to go outside, and that will intensify your depressurization.
That's a perfect example, and this was kind of interesting to look at because, I was looking at this going, well, are there any rules of thumb? Are there anything that we can all just kind of, every time we close the bedroom door, if there's no other acting force in there, can we assume that it's going to be positive? And you can kind of do that. Experience is going to show you that most of the time it's going to be positive. But exactly what Wade just said, every once in a while you're going to have some weird thing going on that's actually going to cause this zone here or this room to be under negative pressure. And in that case, it was, there was the pressure inside of this zone was pushing under the door, and or there was just a hole, there was negative pressure outside. There's all kinds of things that can cause that, to get the air in this room to move out through that hole in the window or through the air conditioner. But if we were going to have that rule of thumb, it'd be like look at your forces inside of each of those zones and think about, could this zone be positive or negative based on those forces? If you're not sure, measure them. And we essentially are doing that when we're doing a worst case test. You close that door and you watch the pressure. Close that door and you watch the pressure. But that's not always the perfect, you could close this door and watch the pressure, and then you could close this door, and maybe it was something going on in this zone that also had an effect on this zone, which now this zone has gone negative. So it's not perfect. It's not always going to be straightforward and simple. So what else do we need to worry about? So the auditor found the house in this condition, but now we start working on it. What are some of the things that we can do during the process that could totally throw a wrench in all of this?
Add fans.
Yeah, the big one is the fan. I had a house that we went into to do a QCI on it, and it was failing worst case draft. And I was there with the QCI, and we went through everything, and we were trying to figure out why it was failing worst case draft, because when they were there, apparently it had been passing worst case draft. And what we found out was that they had adjusted their ASHRAE fan to its final setting after they did their last worst case draft test. And so they ended up turning up the ASHRAE fan, which started drawing more air out of the home and caused the appliance to fail. So anyway, it was just interesting, and we went back through every single step. They did everything correct other than they should have adjusted the ASHRAE fan and then conducted their final test. So if we were to add an ASHRAE fan to this house in the bathroom, what would that do to things? So, you know, we're halfway through the process. You guys just installed an ASHRAE fan. Now what? What's it going to do to the pressure in that bathroom?
When you're working on the house, why don't you just test the house with the fan all the way up all the time?
You could do that if that's what you guys want to do. Now, we have to have some concessions when it comes to the worst case scenario. Because if you wanted to, you could really go worst case, and you could turn that fan up all the way. We have not written this anywhere. I feel like it's reasonable for that fan setting to be set where it's supposed to be set, and to call that worst case. So even though the fan could be turned up much higher, most of our clients are not going to turn that up.
But hey, we have 2 settings on our fan, so what happens when you flip the switch? It's going to go from ASRAE to high.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It should be on its highest setting, correct. Yeah. So, yeah, under normal conditions, it's moving like 30 CFM, but then when they walk in the bathroom and they want to, you know, have a shower, it's gonna kick up to 80 CFM. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it jumps up. I mean, the fan's got basically 2 speeds. The ASRAE is, say, 30, and then when you flip the switch, it's now running at 80.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's...
Yeah, so you'll test at the highest possible flow rate that might be achievable. So if it can achieve 80 CFM by the client going in and flipping a switch and taking a shower, that's where you want to test at.
Yeah.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if the QCI got a test because they adjusted the fan, that shouldn't have technically happened.
Oh.
It should have been tested at high in the beginning.
Yeah.
At the highest rate possible, anyway.
Well, they had it set, I think they had it set intermittently, where it was only kicking on like 30 minutes out of every hour. And it was, anyway, they had, I think they had it somewhere down around the 30 or 50, but they had to turn it up to 80. So, yeah, but absolutely, either way, it shouldn't have happened, but it's interesting how weird little things happen like that, and so I share it with you just to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future, we hope. But absolutely, it really should be tested at its highest flow rate, because the people living in this home could definitely walk in there and turn the fan on in the middle of the night and forget and leave it on, and they could close all of these doors, and you know, and they could be doing some laundry, and they could start dumping a bunch of CO in their house. You know, we never know exactly what the homeowner is going to do, so we try to, within the controls or the things that they can affect, we try to turn all of those things on. So what do you think would happen to the pressure in this bathroom if it was at 20 pascals and now we have an exhaust fan in it?
It depends on how much you're pulling with your fan, but it should go more negative.
Yeah, it's probably going to drop, and I've exaggerated this again and said, okay, let's say it's moving 50 pascals of pressure, so we have this massive fan. It's one of the big ass fans. Anyway, so we now have a change in pressure, and it's caused this little room to go, let's say, negative 30 in our little sterile environment, right? Now, what is that? How does that affect everything else in the house?
If the door is technically really sealed, it shouldn't, but it's most likely not.
Yeah. Everybody else feel the same?
Yeah.
So I'm going to open that door. Now, I really appreciate that Tony pointed out that this bathroom technically is not part of your CAZ when you're calculating the volume of air. And so I hope that me saying, you know, now this should be part of the open zone, but really Tony is correct. It should not be part of your CAZ when you're calculating that air. But
It's not part of your calculation for combustion air because it has a door on it, but it is part of your worst case scenario.
yes,
So that's maybe a way to look at it.
well put. And so that's it. I opened the door on that bathroom, and now this should, you know, in our perfect scenario, that should represent our worst case setup for the house. So you guys agree, disagree? Other things you'd be concerned about?
Yeah, I agree. You're good.
So now if we've set all of this up and we're measuring our pressure near this combustion appliance, and our minimum acceptable draft is like a -2. If this appliance is, so now we're on to the second part of our test, right? So the second part of the test is now we're going to test the pressure inside the vent on this water heater. If that pressure is at a -3.5 and our minimum acceptable draft is a -2, how are we doing? Is that okay? Yeah. Do we care? Do we care how negative this CAZ is?
No, it passed.
Yeah, it can't be more than 5.
Yeah, we have
Oh, yeah, right now we do, because you're right. It can't be more than 5.
we
But until
have CAZ depressurization limits, but and yes, currently in our guidelines they're listed there, and it's a requirement to do something about it. But in reality, no, we don't really care, right?
No, it's safe.
I don't think we're ever going to stop teaching the CAZ depressurization limits, but it's more of a CAZ depressurization guideline. Like, it's an indication of, if you're seeing that your CAZ is at a -15, that should cause you to walk out here and go, why? Oh, why? Is it because my return air? Is it because of this fan? Like, what is causing my CAZ to go so negatively? So what if our depressurization limit was a -2 and this is at +1? We good or we bad?
If it's anything other than a negative number, you're backdrafting.
Yeah. So if it was at a -1 and our depressurization limit was a -2, we still haven't met the requirement. So this thing's not venting very well. So now, and I think it was mentioned earlier, at least one suggestion, but what can we do to fix this?
Probably the easy button is get rid of the louvers on the door and bring in outside combustion air is probably the easy button and probably the most cost-effective solution.
Okay. Anybody have any other ideas or on how to fix this? What else could we do here?
Add a supply register to the water heater room.
Okay, if you added a supply register to the water heater room, what would that do?
Pressurize it.
Okay. It's an option. Any other options?
You also try positive pressure ASHRAE ventilation instead of negative pressure.
All right. So don't use the fan and use positive pressure into the duct system. What else can we do?
Transfer grills on the bedroom doors or the hall or ceiling from the bedrooms.
Okay. Any other options? Come on, you know you want to say it. It's the one that everybody likes to hit, the big easy button, the big expensive easy button.
Direct vent water heater.
Yeah. The point is that there's a bunch of different things we can do, and it's not always going to be the same one in every home. So I think most of what we've discussed, most of you guys really have a solid understanding of all of that. I just wanted to share this scenario because we talked about this a few months ago, and Wade actually, he discussed this concept, and I think most of you understood what he was talking about when he discussed it. I did not. And it's because I'm visual, I'm tactile, I like it. I sat there and listened to what he was saying, and it just did not click for me. And then that afternoon, I went into this house with Jesse up at Bragg, and he closed the doors and showed me. And I was like, oh, he goes, this is what Wade was talking about today. And I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And it just because I needed to see it. So I just wanted to share with you guys so that you could see one example. I think there's, every single home we go in is going to have different examples. But some of the key indicators for this is just, you're going to have combustion air from the inside should usually be a bit of a trigger for it, or just the large open CAZ, the basements without any doors, things like that. Have you guys seen any other scenarios like this that were just weird or strange that you kind of thought it was a good example of this? Have you seen the pressure change or anything drastically when you were during the process at all, or anything that you guys would say to watch out for when we're working that we haven't already addressed, that is? All right, well, I don't know, I feel like we covered it fairly well. If anybody has any questions, or if you feel like you would like more training on this, feel free to reach out to us. Will definitely help. Wade, do you have anything else on this, or any cautions or anything that I haven't addressed?
No, I think we did good. I just always want to point out to the guys, remember that supply duct leakage out of the envelope is exactly the same thing as an exhaust fan, and you're talking large CFN numbers. So anytime you have supply duct leakage out of the envelope, that's going to dramatically increase your depressurization in the house. And the weird thing we found was the swamp cooler in the bedroom window. Again, just to emphasize that, if you see that situation, once you close that bedroom door and that bedroom has a supply run in it, and that big hole to the outside, which in this case was the swamp cooler, it will cause a serious depressurization, because now you've just got all of the supply air in that room, and 6-inch run can be easily 150 CFM blowing directly to the outdoors. So just watch for those kinds of situations.
But wait, don't you want us to put the house in winter conditions before we start, and wouldn't that be covering up that swamp cooler?
It very well may be, but I'm just saying we went into a situation where that swamp cooler was wide open to the outside. It wasn't covered. That's the way the client had it set up, and in that situation, once we turned on the air handler, I'm sorry, what'd you say? I didn't hear you.
I just thought we weren't supposed to test like that. I thought we were supposed to test with the house in winter conditions, which would call for us to cover that. I agree with you 100%. I don't think we should. I think we should keep the house in the condition that the client has it in.
I think Tony has a very valid point that, so When we're talking about wintertime condition, what test are we doing? We're doing our blower door, total leakage, right?
Right, but it's also got to do with the CAZ too. You put it in, it's part of your testing. That's the way that we've always talked about it.
I don't think we've given any direction on that at all, but your point is correct. If there is an air conditioner in a bedroom and we're doing a CAZ depressurization test, that air conditioner, and it's under normal conditions, that is open, that should probably be left open.
Your point is valid, Tony. Yes, in wintertime conditions, those things are probably normally closed somehow. I'm just pointing out there are those weird things you run into. So this was an example we ran into in the field, out working with some guys. The client had a swamp cooler in his bedroom that wasn't covered with anything. And of course that bedroom door would get closed and there's a supply run in there and the furnace is running. And when that thing came on, because that supply run, all that supply air could go directly to the outdoors, it was causing massive depressurization in the house. Now, we, of course, told the client, we did some client education, you should close the swamp cooler off, not only because of the energy penalty, but, because of the safety concerns. But, yeah, test in wintertime conditions. I'm just trying to make you aware of a situation we ran into in the field. So that's all.
Yeah, and Tony is correct. Like that is our standard practice, right? Listed right on the worst case draft is to put it in a wintertime condition. But yeah, if you notice that and you felt like, hey, opening that up is going to change things, you're welcome to do that. And I bet you'd be right most of the time that it would actually change the whole scenario. So, and if you feel like that's how the client is going to live in the house, so you've covered that up and eliminated that, but now they're going to close all their doors tonight and run that swamp cooler, and they're going to suck a bunch of combustion gases into their bedroom. Yeah, by all means, do it the right way. So, great point. Anybody else got anything they want to add? Well, thank you guys for your participation. Hopefully this was at least a refresher, maybe helpful in some way. And, keep doing good work and have a good day. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Matt.